M to 3,000 Years of Longing, which is a fantasy, and it runs for 108 minutes, rates M at the cinemas. Look, I think it was the highest grossing movie of 1992. That was Aladdin, was it not? And that gave us the story of the genie in a lamp. And now we fast forward 30 years and you've got this tale of a gin in a bottle. You've got a character called Dr. Alethea Binney, played by Tilda Swinton. She's a fated scholarly storyteller. There's a name that they give the storyteller here, but I've simplified it and just said storyteller. She's a creature of reason, and she's having vivid and alarming visions. On a conference in Istanbul, she purchases an old, misshapen bottle. But when she tries to clean it, something quite extraordinary happens. Her rubbing triggers the appearance of a jinn, which is a genie, who's been trapped inside for a great many years. He proceeds to relay to her how, on 3 separate occasions, after he was freed, forces conspired to see him trapped again. These fantastic tales involve love, war, and betrayal. To remain free, the jinn implores Alethea to make 3 wishes. Mind you, in so doing, there are rules. So, one example, she can't wish for eternal life. She, Alethea, is suspicious that she may be being taken on a ride. But the more she hears, the stronger her connection to the jinn. So, still, there are sounds in this modern world that don't sit comfortably with the jinn either. Because bear in mind, he's been around for literally thousands of years. So 3,000 Years of Longing is, well, I thought it was quite engaging, decidedly far-fetched. I mean, it is a fantasy. It's a fantasy about connection. And one thing, it's proof positive that Tilda Swinton has credibility even when she plays a creative, if lonely soul in a story of make-believe. And she's got this sort of intelligent visage that is her hallmark, even in a movie which is as out there as 3,000 Years of Longing. Don't you think, Dave?
Oh, definitely. I thought this was a stunning film. We're really seeing what filmmakers were able to achieve during COVID. This was another COVID film. George Miller tried to find a film that he could film during COVID with all the restrictions that were on how many people you could have on set and things like that. And this, normally you would expect to be a big $200 million production, traveling to Egypt to film, traveling to Turkey to film. Instead, George Miller found a way to make a sci-fi fantasy like this with normally just 2 or 3 people on set at a time for filming, like apart from the crew, and it turns out to be absolutely amazing. It does at times feel like you're watching a theatrical production, but it works so well, and it makes the mystical element of it seem even more magical to watch with the way that he's been able to bring it to screen, knowing that for a majority of this time it was a crew and 2 and 3 people in front of the camera.
Yeah, remarkable. Absolutely, quite so, because it looks really lavish, doesn't it?
It does. That's like I said, it looks like a big $180, $190 million film like we see get made these days, but you know that it was made in a very tight way, very restrictive way, but I think that actually adds to the film. The only thing I find interesting about this film is I'm not sure what market it's going to go for, because I can't see a lot of younger people wanting to see this film. It has that weird kind of feel where it's part popcorn and part artistic film. So, yeah, it's very interesting. I saw this in an open session the other night, and the amount of people that were in the cinema surprised me because there was more in there than what I thought would be there, but the audience was very much an older audience.
Ah, yeah, and it's not a kids' film, let's be honest, in terms of content, not a young kids' film. Having said that, this is the man, George Miller, who is responsible for Babe and Happy Feet, not to overlook Mad Max.
Yep.
So he's got pedigree in the genre, doesn't he, Greg?
I haven't seen this one yet, Alex.
That's all right. Well, Peter, I mean, this is a guy who sometimes breaks expectation in terms of the films that he makes, George Miller.
He certainly does, and George Miller has directed, I think, something that is quite special in many respects. Not perfect, but a fantasy that harks back, for me, to the Hollywood films of the 50s that went into Egypt and Arabia and
Yes.
Arabian culture and so on. And so there is that sort of strong fantasy element to it, but also it's about a relationship, and Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton do such a good job of developing their relationship, their understanding of each other's different backgrounds, perspectives, and histories. And what I really liked about this film is the clever use of special effects in this film, not to overwhelm the audience, but to assist with the understanding of these characters and the difference between the two of them, and how they attempt to find some sort of middle ground that they can work together on. Really interesting film. I enjoyed it. Very clever. I perhaps would have liked a bit more of the backstories, especially of Tilda Swinton's character, but nevertheless I thought it was a pretty good film.
Well, I mean, the picture's really colourful throughout, and the production design by Roger Ford, that was a feature to me. Visual effects, they are allowed to flourish, and there's plenty to admire. It's been co-written with Augusta Gore, and if you think about it, both Miller and Gore have let their imaginations wander. Their imaginations have gone wild. And it is based on a short story called The Djinn in the Nightingale's Eye by A.S. Byatt. I can't say that I had seen or read that short story before I saw the film. I thought that Idris Elba, he sort of really added this sort of big-ticket gravitas as the Djinn. And the way that the Djinn first appears is quite memorable, isn't it? You think about it, Peter.
Yes.
First visage, I mean, this sort of bronze, massive structure of a... I think it was only initially a hand, isn't it, that we see from the collection. And that was a wonderful introduction to this movie. And this Djinn weaves many a colourful story. And the way I look at it, and this is where you talked about the audience, Dave, it's painted as an adult fairy tale, isn't it? It's not a film that's going to attract a 7-year-old.
Exactly, and yeah, it does.
Because some of the sexuality involved, it wouldn't be appropriate for a 7-year-old to see either.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's where it kind of sits in that kind of weird realm, and I think the poster is what actually helps that to happen as well, because the poster almost makes it look like it is a film for kids, like that it's a retelling of Aladdin. So then when you go into it and you see the adult content, it is... it sits the film in a really weird spot. I think we also have to pay tribute to John Seale here, the cinematographer as well. He does a magnificent job with this film, and he's been brought out of retirement to do this film. George Miller's been able to bring him out of retirement twice now to get him to work on films. But just a marvellous cinematographer who, again, does an amazing job with this film.
I hate to draw a parallel to football. No, I don't, but I will. It's kind of like Alistair Clarkson calling upon his right-hand man, whose life has moved on, to get back to working with him at North Melbourne.
Exactly, and when you look at John Seale's career, he's worked on films like The Talented Mr. Ripley, Witness, and The English Patient, but yeah, then he went into retirement, and George Miller pulled him out for Mad Max Fury Road, and now has pulled him out again 8 years later to do this one. So, and I think that actually helps, because John Seale does have a fantastic career with the films that he's done, but he's also done some of the Harry Potter films. He also did Prince of Persia. So this style that we see with this film is right in his ballpark for the films that he's made throughout his career.
Peter, are you impressed that football overlaps with film?
You do live a rich fantasy life, Alex.
Thank you very much. Now, let's get a score from you, Dave.
Look, I really, really enjoyed this film. It surprised me how much I enjoyed it. I'm going to give it 8.5 out of 10.
Wow. For 3,000 years of longing, that's a big score. I wouldn't rate it that highly. I'd give it a 7. What would you give it, Peter?
Yeah, I also give it 7 out of 10. I really liked it.
Okay.